Hi, this is Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, here to talk about a fight that's been 17 years in the making, the rematch of Roy Jones Jr. versus Bernard Hopkins. Now, maybe I must have forgot, but I believe Las Vegas has this fight correct. The odds favor Bernard Hopkins, and I'm picking Bernard Hopkins in this fight. The first fight, the 17-year-old fight, is one of the more fascinating tapes on YouTube. It's between two very elite fighters. If you go back and look at that tape, you're going to see that even though Roy Jones won the fight by unanimous decision by something like 116 to 112, you're going to see that in the second half of the fight, Bernard Hopkins, who was the lesser-known fighter, lightly regarded at the time, relatively unknown, Bernard Hopkins actually starts shortening the distance between himself and Roy Jones, and he actually started to time Roy Jones, and he started to land a straight right hand right between Jones's defense. I believe that Bernard Hopkins is the more technical fighter. Hopkins, as a counterpuncher, naturally picks up things during a fight. And whenever you give a counterpuncher who has figured you out a rematch, even if he figured you out 17 years ago, and I don't believe Jones's style has changed much, that counterpuncher will be able to pick up right where he left off. Now, I'm a big fan of both fighters, but let me just point out that Roy Jones has a hole in his game. If you watch his fights, he's excellent from very long range. He has one of the better left hooks in the business. But if you're able to step in a little bit and instead of fighting a long range game, if you're able to fight a mid range game, you could literally take Roy Jones apart. Both of these guys have slowed down a little bit in old age. I understand that Bernard Hopkins is 4 years older than Roy Jones, but Bernard doesn't have the holes in his game that Roy Jones does. Now, I know I'm going to get a lot of emails from fans who saw Roy Jones beat Jeff Lacy inside. Understand that Bernard Hopkins knows that if he fights this fight at mid-range, in other words, just inside of Roy Jones's hook, if he's able to close the distance and fight the fight that he fought 17 years ago, in the last third of the fight, I believe Bernard Hopkins wins this fight rather comfortably. Jones might be able to tie people up on the ropes and, grab and hold when you're in close, and he might be able to just use superior hand speed and athleticism when you're far away from him. But when you're mid-range on Roy Jones, I think he has problems. And I certainly believe that Bernard Hopkins this time around is going to be able to block Jones's left hook. I don't think Jones has the legs that he had 17 years ago. He's actually going to have to deal with, in my opinion, a better preserved, certainly much more technically gifted fighter, literally deconstructing him. Also, don't be fooled. Even though Bernard Hopkins lost that first fight, Hopkins is such a technician that Hopkins actually handily beat Glenn Johnson and handily beat Antonio Tarver, both of whom beat Roy Jones. Hopkins, I believe, should be able to land that straight right on Roy Jones, move just enough to make Roy Jones uncomfortable, and literally not spend the first 4 to 5 rounds of this fight trying to figure out his opponent. Let me also point out, too, when you're an unorthodox fighter, whether that's Joe Calzaghe or whether that's Roy Jones, when you're unorthodox, you really should be very hesitant to give fighters a rematch because the longer the fighter sees you in the ring, the more they can figure out your style. Being unorthodox is a big advantage, and Roy Jones is very unorthodox. Being unorthodox is a big advantage because, of course, opponents can't train to fight a guy who has a very unique style. So you'll notice that Joe Calzaghe, although he did give one guy a rematch, a guy he stopped early in the first fight, Joe Calzaghe never gave a rematch to guys like Mikhail Kessler because I believe he understood that the longer Kessler was in the ring with him, the bigger the risk. Roy Jones has given Bernard Hopkins a rematch. I don't believe Roy Jones' style has changed that much in 17 years. I think that Bernard Hopkins' style has matured quite a bit. I think all of those early rounds where Roy Jones kind of is able to keep an opponent off balance with feints and left hooks from left field and dropping his left so that he always has his right cocked and turning sideways and giving his opponent very little surface area to hit. I think Bernard Hopkins is going to be prepared for all of that. Don't be fooled too by Bernard Hopkins' age of 45, because if you look at Hopkins' record, you're going to see that Bernard Hopkins doesn't fight that often. Hopkins literally lately has been fighting about once a year. And so Hopkins is actually a very well preserved, very young 45. Also, in terms of corners, Hopkins, of course, has Naseem Richardson in his corner. Richardson has greatly helped recently the career of Sugar Shane Mosley. He is one of the best in the business. Roy Jones has the same corner he has always had, Alton Merkerson. My only point to you is Naseem Richardson was not in Hopkins's corner the first go round. With a nice fresh set of eyes, I believe Hopkins and Richardson will have the upper hand here in figuring out how to deal with Roy. Also, I was not impressed by how Roy got up off the canvas against Danny Green. I thought he looked like a shot fighter. Quite frankly, something was not working right um, on Roy Jones. Now, the way they have split up the purse in this fight, it's 50-50. But if a fighter wins by knockout, then it's 60-40. All I'm saying is this. I'm not recommending that you take either guy by knockout. But what I am saying is, boxing's a very hard sport. Guys do get old overnight. If you recall the Oscar De La Hoya fight against Manny Pacquiao, how his reflexes looked very dim. And, just understand that both of these guys have a huge financial incentive to get the knockout. Also, these guys aren't BSing. They really don't like each other. It's one thing to tease your opponent at pre-fight press conferences. These guys have been downright brutal, accusing each other of resentment and jealousy and all this other stuff. So don't be surprised if one of these guys tries to put the exclamation point at the end of the sentence. I do feel, given how shabby Roy Jones looked at the end of the Danny Green fight, that there is a possibility that Bernard Hopkins forces Roy Jones to quit on his stool or drops Roy Jones like Glenn Johnson dropped Roy Jones, one of the more brutal knockouts in recent memory in boxing. I like Bernard in this fight. Let me know what you think. As I always say, if I'm wrong, punish me in the ratings here on YouTube, but if I'm right, give me 5 stars. Leave your comments for me here on YouTube and visit me at gamblersadvisory.com. Thanks for watching.